I was 15 and just got hired at McDonald's down the street from where I live. While working there, I met some kids my age that I became close with. They were very rebellious. They would clown around at work, act disrespectful to customers. I slowly started to become like them. I began disrespecting my parents, which was totally not like me, but I wanted to fit in. One night, around 10 p.m., I went downstairs to grab something to eat. I opened the fridge and heard my dad's footsteps. "Chris, I've asked you all day to take out the trash. Do it now." Normally, I would have taken it out the first time he asked me, but now that I was getting older and becoming a smartass, I didn't think it should be my responsibility anymore. "I work now and go to school. You take it out," I replied. My dad's eyes got wide, as I've never spoken to him this way before. He leaned in and said softly, "As long as you live here, you will help out. Now take out the trash or leave." I called his bluff, and rather than just simply taking the trash out, I rebelled like the dumb teen that I was. "Fine, I'll leave. You're gonna kick me out for that? Don't bother looking for me. I'm done living in this stupid house." I opened the door and slammed it. I walked towards the McDonald's to see if any of my friends were there, but they weren't. Of course, of all nights, it was raining, so I had to go find somewhere to stay dry. There was a bridge with an overpass a little ways down the street, so I started walking towards it. The whole time, I'm regretting what I did and wished I just took out the damn trash. I finally get to the bridge. I remember in school learning to go here in case of a tornado, so I knew it was safe. I patiently and stubbornly waited, assuming that my parents would call the cops, which in my mind would show me that they cared. An hour goes by. Nothing. No sirens. No cars were even on the road. It was getting pretty cold, but I promised myself I wouldn't give in. I crossed my arms over my legs and fell asleep. I woke up violently from a semi wailing on his horn on the overpass. I looked all around, confused. How long was I out for? I looked towards the McDonald's and saw an old man in a gray suit sitting at the bus stop. It was weird. He was sitting still, facing forward. I assumed it must have been like 5 a.m. since he was waiting for the bus. I stood up, very upset that my parents never tried to find me, and began walking to the bus stop. I walked closer to the old guy. I didn't get any negative vibe as I approached him. He slowly turned his head, looked at me, and smiled. Not a creepy or uncomfortable smile, a genuine, peaceful smile. I smiled back and decided instead of going home, maybe I can vent to this guy and get some advice. I asked if he minded if I sat down. He smiled again and gestured towards the seat. "Is everything okay?" he said with concern. "Yeah, I just ran away from home. My parents don't respect me anymore and how much I do all day," I said. I began telling him the story and noticed that as time went on, he was becoming more and more anxious and his smile began turning into a frown. He began to start breathing loud. Eventually, he cut me off dead sentence and said, "You need to go home now," with a stern voice. I was confused. I figured maybe his bus was coming soon and he wanted to say that before he left. Suddenly, I felt a strong grasp on my arm. He grabbed me and looked me dead in the eyes. His eyes were terrifying at this point, bloodshot and wide, and I was shaking in fear, totally thrown off guard by his complete switch in persona. He was literally shaking like he was afraid of something. He kept looking down the street and then back into my eyes. "You need to go home now." At this point, this guy was starting to scare me. I stood up and nodded, and he let go of my arm. Nervously, I started walking back to my house. I figured my mom was already up making coffee, so my plan of sneaking back in the house and hiding in the basement was not gonna happen. Just to see if she'd be up, I looked at my watch. It was 1:30 a.m. My heart stopped and my throat became dry. Why was that man at the bus stop at 1:30 a.m. when the buses aren't even running? I turned back to look at him. He was gone. Now I'm scared and confused. I needed to get home. I used my spare key to get into the house. I opened the door quietly, and everyone was asleep. I slowly opened the basement door and made my way downstairs to the storage area in the back. I buried myself under bags of clothes so they wouldn't find me. Figured I could get some sleep. The image of that guy kept popping into my head, and I was so freaked out. It just made no sense. I woke up to hearing my mother sobbing upstairs. I looked outside the little basement window and saw daylight, so I figured I'd go upstairs and get my apology. I opened the basement door and walked into the kitchen. My mother was sitting at the dining room table with her head in her arms. She immediately looked up at me and gasped. She stood up and ran over to me and hugged me so tight. "I thought you were dead," she muffled into my jacket. I slowly pulled away and looked at her confused. "Why would you think that?" I asked. She said that last night, around 1:40 a.m., a drunk driver crashed into the bus stop in front of the McDonald's. It was completely destroyed. I started breathing heavy and realized that man saved my life. If he didn't tell me to leave when he did, I would have been sitting there and would have been killed. So many emotions were running through me, I didn't know how to handle it, so I just hugged my mother and immediately began to cry. I don't know who or what that was at the bus stop, but thank you for saving my life. Whether it was just a lucky coincidence or a right place, right time kind of thing. All I know is if it wasn't for him telling me to go home, I would have been sitting on that bench for the rest of the night. Now this literally sounds like some incident of divine intervention. Like this person was at a bus stop 10 minutes before it would be completely destroyed. Now here's another sort of strange theory of mine. I mean, it's more of a concept than a theory, or something that I actually believe, but it's still interesting nonetheless. Maybe our lives are meant to follow like a certain path. There's certain things we're supposed to do, people we're supposed to meet, and places we're supposed to be or not be. Maybe when we start to get close to the edge of that path, we encounter some form of resistance or just some factor that pushes us back on track. When I was 20, I took a job as a direct care worker at a group home for adults with developmental disabilities. The home I worked in had 6 residents, all of which had severe physical and mental impairments. I worked the midnight shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. When I arrived for my shift, the residents were already tucked into bed. It was overall a pretty boring job. I worked with one other person, and we cleaned the house and stocked up on supplies while they slept. We also had 2 medications to pass during our shift, and in the last hour, we would give 2 residents showers. One night, my coworker and I were just settling into our shift. I started a pot of coffee, and we chatted. It was around 10:30 p.m. We had baby monitors in the residents' rooms and in the kitchen so we could hear them if they were in distress. Suddenly, we heard one resident, Rachel, through the monitor. She was coughing and gagging uncontrollably. My coworker and I jumped up because we knew what was happening. Rachel had been congested that week, and she didn't have the ability to roll herself over. This had happened several times in the past, and it was always a serious situation. The excessive coughing could cause her to vomit, in which case she could aspirate and die. We tended to Rachel immediately, rolling her on her side. Sure enough, we had gotten to her just in time. After a while, her coughing ceased and her breathing returned to normal. We cleaned her up, changed her clothes and bedding, and made sure she was propped up better with pillows. Adrenaline was still pumping through us as the whole situation was a bit frightening for a couple of 20-year-olds with minimal medical training. We agreed that we would check on Rachel frequently for the rest of the night and write an incident report. My coworker and I left the resident area and headed back to the common room. I was ready for my coffee and she was ready for a cigarette. She headed outside and I went to fill my cup. That's when I noticed the lights on the coffee pot weren't on. That's weird. It's plugged in and I hadn't tripped the breaker. I started pouring my cup and I realized it was ice cold. That didn't make any sense to me. I had just started the coffee less than an hour ago. Why wasn't it hot? I rolled my eyes, figuring something must be wrong with the coffee pot. I dumped it out and went to start again when my coworker barged through the back door. Her eyes were huge. A little startled, I asked her what was wrong. She asked me if I'd looked at the clock. I immediately looked up and saw that it read 5:30 a.m. Before I could make sense of things, she shoved her cell phone in my face, which also read 5:30 a.m. We couldn't have been with Rachel longer than 45 minutes, but we had lost around 7 hours. Neither of us could make sense of it. We walked into the back of the house and walked out 7 hours later without time feeling like it had passed at all. We hadn't given out meds, done bed checks, given showers, or cleaned anything. The next shift was coming in half an hour, and it felt like we had just arrived. We did our best to pull it together and at least make it look like we'd worked all night. When the next shift arrived, we just sat at the table silently and then left. We never told any of our coworkers about the experience. It sounded crazy. If I hadn't experienced it myself, I wouldn't believe it either. My coworker and I lost touch eventually as we both moved on to other jobs. We recently found each other on social media. She sent me a message and asked me about that day. Our memories of the event are exactly the same. I have no idea what happened in those 7 hours. I do know that there was never a problem with the coffee pot. It timed out after 4 hours and shut itself off. Now, we've covered experiences about people losing time in the past. Usually, though, those have only been like 30 minutes to an hour max, which is much easier to explain than 7. And again, this was experienced by 2 people at the same time, so this one is just very difficult to explain rationally. When I was very young, my mother was a manager at a fairly substantial hotel. It was tower-like, had 7 or more floors, and was at least a century old. In very old hotels, while your room might be very nice and the hallways very straightforwardly simple, there's a massive labyrinth of tunnels, hallways, corridors, rooms, and elevators behind the scenes that the staff can get through so they can quickly serve your room in case the normal ways are busy and crowded. So when I was about 10, I knew my way around many of these corridors and was zipping around under and around the dollies and carts full of towels and luggage. The large, open-air, fire escape-style stairs around back were open, and I darted down 2 floors to where the pool area was. What happened next was barely 5 or 10 seconds, but I remember everything like it happened in extreme slow motion. First, I heard the flapping of fabric, like someone shaking out a sheet or a towel, or like a flapping flag, and then something extremely heavy falling onto the metal railing above me, so loud and sudden that it had to weigh a ton and bend the bars. Then, a shower of dust came down on me. I had barely been able to react before it was over. I thought someone had accidentally dropped a tray of food over a railing somehow. I have to stress, this happened over the course of barely 5 seconds. I looked up, and the railing above me had a massive radial crack in it. This was a foot-thick slab of concrete, so whatever it was must have been extremely heavy. I immediately ran back in and found the first person I could. I told them something fell onto the stairs above. I could barely explain what I heard, but despite how loud it was, she said she hadn't heard a single thing. We went up the stairs, running at full speed. When we got to that ledge, I saw it. The marble tile that covered it was cracked, like something had taken a sledgehammer to a windshield. Right there, I pointed at it. The woman stared at me, and then her face became incredulous. "Oh, come on," she said, annoyed. "That's always been there. You think I haven't seen that before?" I asked what she was talking about. She said that 50 years ago, a man who was affiliated with the mafia stayed there and jumped to his death, falling onto that floor. Years later, I looked up the hotel to see how it was doing. My mother and I long since had moved, and on one of the history pages, it specified the exact same story that the woman told me. How the man's head cracked the marble before he flopped over the edge down to the very lowest floor. More interestingly, many people over the years, both guests and workers alike, ever since the 1930s when it happened, have reported hearing a horrific cracking impact from their hotel rooms and hallways. They've never replaced the cracked marble because it's too expensive and they consider it character. When I was 13, we moved into a normal suburban area in North Richland Hills, Texas. For context, my dad was in Oklahoma gathering the rest of our stuff from our old house to bring it to our Texas home. It was just me and my mom alone. We were excited to have a girls-only weekend. However, one morning, I was woken up by the sound of our garage door handle violently shaking. I immediately thought that someone was trying to get inside because our neighbor the prior week had someone throw a brick through their back door's glass attempting to break in. I had just woken up, so I slowly peeked around the corner to where the door was, and I hear footsteps coming from my parents' room. I, of course, assumed it was just my mom, as we were the only ones there. I looked to my parents' room, panicked, and out comes my mom wearing a blue towel on her head and mascara running down her eyes. She looked as if she had just gotten out of the shower, which I thought was strange since I had not heard the water heater making noise, since the water heater was right outside of my bedroom. She asked me calmly, "Was that you?" She's squinting at me. My mom has terrible vision without glasses or contacts, so this is normal. She stares at me for a moment, then slowly walks back into her room. At this point, the shaking of the doorknob stops, and everything goes silent. I then ran to my closet in my room to hide. I called my dad from my closet, crying and frantic. I whispered on the phone to him, explaining what was happening. He told me, "Get out of the house and call 911. I hesitated, but called 911 like he said. The operator was asking me so many questions, I couldn't focus. I made it to the middle of the living room. I was sneaking to escape out of our back door. My mom then opens the front door. She stood there, fully dressed, with arms full of groceries. My neighbor that my dad must have called was also with her. My mom was panicked, asking me what happened. I told her, "Mom, you were right there." She asked, "Why didn't you open the garage door for me? I forgot my house key. What are you talking about?" I was shocked. I explained to her what I had seen. She looked at me confused, as did my neighbor standing with her. I then explained to the operator that it was my mother and to cancel the emergency units en route. I apologized to her and hung up the call. So this happened earlier this morning, but it's still on everyone's mind here. I was doing the laundry and was moving clothes from the washing machine to the dryer. While I was moving things over, I picked up my Optimus Prime shirt and put it in the dryer. Then one of my kids needed me in the kitchen, so I walked away. When I went back to the washing machine, I picked up the next item, and it was, again, my Optimus Prime shirt. I figured I had just mistaken the first shirt for a different one and threw it in. A few items later, again, one of my kids needed something, so I walk away, and when I get back, I again pull out the same Optimus Prime shirt from the washing machine, and I say out loud, "What the hell? This is weird," and I throw it in the dryer. My oldest daughter walked in and asked what was going on. I tell her, and she looks in the dryer. She says there's 3 of the shirts in there. It's impossible as I only own one, so I go look in the dryer, and yes, indeed there's 3 identical shirts, all wet as well. My daughter gets excited and calls my wife to take a look to confirm we're not crazy. My wife also sees the 3 identical shirts, and she knows I only own one as she bought it for me. My wife says we should get a picture, and she walks out of the laundry room to get her phone. While she's getting her phone, a loud bang comes from the laundry room. We all quickly go back in there. Nothing seemed out of place or fallen, but when my daughter looked in the dryer, there was only one Optimus Prime shirt. We emptied the dryer, but in the end, there was only a single shirt. Still no idea what happened there, but all 3 of us saw the multiple shirts. What makes this one so notable is that all 3 members of the family apparently saw this happen. Now, I'd say there's like 2 parts of this that are just really confusing to me. Number 1 is the fact that right as they went to go get evidence of this happening, it all just like fixed itself. And number 2 is that loud bang that they heard. I don't really know what that could have been, but it seems that whatever that bang was everything sort of reverting back to the way it's supposed to be. I don't know, you guys know that I really like these glitch stories, but this one is just very peculiar because I just don't see them mistaking this for something else. Like, he individually pulled out all 3 of those shirts. It's not like it was just folded in some weird way, so I don't know. I'm sort of at a loss for this one, but if you guys have any theories, as usual, be sure to drop them in the comments. When I was a new mom, shortly after my grandmother had died, we visited her rural lake cottage several states away. It was a small 2-story structure with the bedrooms being situated on the 2nd floor. My son was only about 4 to 6 weeks old, so I was worried that he would keep my other family members awake at night with needing to be fed, being new to the world, etc. Well, the inevitable happened, and my son would not stop fussing in the middle of the night. I decided to go outside with the little guy to get a bit of fresh air. The cottage had burned down to the chimney a couple of years earlier, and the house had been rebuilt, so I wasn't as familiar with it as I had been. I went outside and hadn't realized that the lock was engaged. Now, here I am, in the middle of pretty much nowhere, locked out of the house at 3 a.m. with a newborn. I knocked on and tried the door again and again, but could not get it to open. I even threw pebbles and then rocks at my husband's window to no avail. As I sat outside the door, my back leaning against it, about to lose it completely, I heard a click. The door was unlocked. The door that I had tried dozens and dozens of times to open simply unlocked. Everyone was still soundly asleep and didn't recall hearing any noises at all in the morning. The door had a window, and I could see the entirety of the bottom floor through it. No one was there. But it unlocked for me. So, when I was little, about 5 years old, my grandfather on my mother's side was dying. I personally don't remember what he was dying from because nobody explained it to me. I was never close to my mom's side, mostly because they had a long history of Christian fundamentalism and were abusive. But my mom took me to his hospital room to check up on him either way. I had a reputation for crying when in hospitals because I swore I could see spirits of patients that had died. I'd hide behind my mom near adults as well. But for some reason, I wasn't scared when we went to visit my grandpa. We talked with him and some family members that came along. I hugged my grandpa and told him about what I had been up to lately. Little kid stuff like coloring books and friends. After a while, it was time to go. My mom told me we had to go since Grandpa needed to sleep. She said we could come back the next day and talk with him some more. Although I was very little and don't remember a lot now, my mom told me that I had just stood there staring at my grandfather in the hospital bed. My face was pale. I was a quiet kid and was afraid of adults, so it surprised my mom when I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "But Grandpa won't be here tomorrow, Mom." My mom was confused, and my other family members in the room were mad and gave my mom the stink eye and were appalled I'd even say something like that. We quickly left. She asked me why I said that, and I only replied with the truth, that he'd told me, which made her even more confused. The next day, my mom was getting ready to go see him again. I asked her why she was getting ready to go somewhere. She replied that we were going to see him again. I said, "No, Mom, we can't. He's already gone." She got frustrated with me because she didn't understand what I meant. Before we were about to leave, we were called by my grandma, saying that my grandpa had passed away in the hospital that morning. So my dad and I went on vacation over spring break, and we did some light grocery shopping on the first day. We decided to buy a 4-pack of Coca-Cola in the glass bottles, and I remember specifically saying to my dad, "Only 4?" The next day, he drank one, and I made some joke about cracking open a cold one. The day after that, I also drank one, and he made some joke about me drinking all the Cokes. Therefore, 2 Cokes left. On the last day, we were cleaning out the fridge of everything we hadn't eaten and couldn't take with us, and I saw 3 fucking sodas in the pack. I immediately was like, "Dude, why the fuck are there 3 sodas in here? We each drank one, didn't we?" And he just stared at the fridge for a solid 20 seconds before going, "Huh, you're right," and said how he remembered making a joke both times we each drank one. It bothered the hell out of us. We were trying to wrap our heads around it the entire drive to the airport. We never bought any other sodas or drinks besides our initial grocery shopping trip, but somehow ended up with a 5th bottle of soda. Still kinda bugs me. I was probably 10 or 12. Me and my best friend Ellie were getting dropped off at Sky Zone, this trampoline park. Before we got out of the car to go inside, I closed my eyes and started watching this scene play out. In this daydream, I got out of the car and went inside with my friend Ellie. We bought our passes and instantly went up to the nearest trampolines. I started jumping around. I remember seeing a little kid with blonde hair, and while I was jumping, I felt something drip on my head. I looked up and realized the ceiling was leaking, so I went over to one of the trampoline supervisors and told him, "Hey, there's water dripping onto the trampoline over there." He nodded and put orange hazard cones around the area. Then I opened my eyes. I was still in the car. We got out of the car and I thought nothing of this daydream. We went inside, bought our tickets, and ran up to the nearest trampolines. And word for word, the exact same scene played out before me. Not scary, more so just odd. It's almost like I got a glimpse of what was going to happen, or maybe I had an opportunity to make a different decision but didn't know any better. The idea of getting a redo is very interesting to me. Like, what if the reason why that happened is because that whole moment, although it seemed insignificant at the time, was actually gonna butterfly out into some world-changing event? Now, this is me just purely thinking as a writer, but what if that was her one chance to prevent the apocalypse or something, and she didn't take it? Those are the kinds of stories I want to start writing. So I know that a lot of people here like to watch my true videos, but I also do write fictional stories that are very similar to the ones I tell here. So if you want to give those a shot, those are any of the ones on my channel that have a purple border. Any of the true ones that I'm reading right now are gonna have the blue border. My current boyfriend and I met in August. I met his friend and his wife in September, but never met their daughter since we visited an adult restaurant late at night for a double date. I only remember meeting them this one time and had not gone to their home until October when he moved into his new house and had to get things from their house. I only remember meeting them this one time and had not gone to their home until October when he moved into his new house and had to get some things he was storing at their home. However, this is where things get weird for me. When we went to visit his best friend's house to pick up the things he had stored, my boyfriend walked away while I parked the car. I had no idea which house was theirs, and I had to wait for him to come back out to get me to figure out where it was. When we went inside, his friend's daughter ran up to me. I don't remember ever meeting her, but whatever, kids are strange. Then, the wife asked me how I liked her decorations. I was confused because I had no idea how I would have known her decorations were new. I had never been to their house. All of them acted like I should have known their home location, had met their daughter, and would have been able to see the difference between old decorations and the new ones. I was confused, but didn't think much of it at first. However, turns out there's a date which I have no memory of where me, my boyfriend, and their little family all tried to go bowling. We couldn't go, went to a buffet to eat, and even hung out in our friend's house for a bit, hence why I should have known the location of the house and met their child. While I have a great memory, I played with the possibility that I simply forgot. However, my boyfriend and the others have no proof of this ever happening. Had we gone to the buffet, my boyfriend would have paid. He never uses cash, and there is no charge on his only 2 cards for the date. I also have pictures of almost every day this could have possibly taken place, and there's nothing. Each day is accounted for, and there aren't any photos from that day. It's rare that I don't take pictures on our dates, especially if food is involved. All days this date could have taken place, I have other pictures proving I wasn't anywhere near them. The tracking on Google Maps also backs up that this date never happened. When I was around 10 or 12, I caught a really bad flu. Fevers around 104, vomiting, couldn't even stand, the whole shebang. I was laying on an air mattress in my parents' room, alone, feeling absolutely miserable. All of a sudden, a very pretty woman dressed in old-timey early 1900s nurse clothes appeared above me, bent down, and told me everything would be okay. Touched my forehead as if to test my temperature, smiled at me, and disappeared. I instantly felt cured of whatever flu I had. I could never explain how I went from 1 foot in the grave to completely fine. The woman made me feel safe, loved, and taken care of. She was beautiful. I've never seen her since then, but I wish I could in order to thank her. My boyfriend and I were having lunch together one day when the topic of high school came around. He was telling me about his classmates and all the teachers that everyone either loved or hated. As he was scrolling through his camera roll from senior year, he stopped on a specific photo. He laughs and tells me the story behind it. One day, a teacher was eating straight from a cereal box before class when a student came in and asked him what he was eating. He said, "Honey nut," and for whatever reason, he thought it was the funniest thing ever. She and some friends photoshopped the teacher's head onto a bee and put a caption at the bottom that read, "Honey nut." I remember seeing this photo, a white man with little hair and a blue shirt on a bee's body. This was the photo he stopped on. The next day, I mentioned I was hungry and decided to joke about the story he told me. I said I had a taste for honey nut and looked at him waiting for a reaction. Moments of silence passed and he confusingly said, "What are you talking about?" I briefly retold the story and he laughed, but denied knowing anything I was saying. I took his phone and scrolled back in his camera roll to where we saw the photo. It was gone. The photo before was there, and so was the one after, but there was no trace of this bee. He, to this day, denies anything about a teacher on a bee's body. He remembers talking about his high school stories and going through his camera roll, but not the honey nut teacher. My dad passed when I was in 7th grade. It was very sudden. He was hiding his heart condition, and he never got proper medical treatment for it. Fast forward to months later, my friends came by and hung around our house for a bit. One of my friends, who we'll call Ike, asked me to talk to her in private. Ike ended up confessing that days before my dad passed, she saw a vision of my dad getting sent to the emergency room, describing in full detail the events that happened and the exact clothes he wore when he died. I never told her those details prior to this conversation. She then proceeded to tell me that when she zones out, she gets random visions that happen minutes, days, or even months later, and it freaks her the fuck out. A year later, we were talking about some stuff that's been going on in her life and how she really hasn't been doing well. She then proceeded to tell me that ever since she told me about the visions she had, they just stopped. 6 years have passed, and the thing about my dad still sticks with me. I never asked her about it again, as it kind of disturbs me.